going. It's going. Well, hey there, Hadley. I am so thankful to have you here on the Confident Sober Women podcast. And I know my audience is going to love our conversation as well. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Hadley, and I am a mom of 3 boys, and I'm a marathon runner and a writer. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I describe my journey, my relationship with alcohol, the way I like to say it is, it wasn't about how much or how often I drank. It was about how I felt when I did. And frankly, that was pretty awful. I felt like my relationship with alcohol had been sort of toxic or corrupt since the very first time I drank or got drunk, which was at the age of 14 at a party. I remember it so clearly. And I realized at that moment that alcohol let me be something I wasn't. It let me be outgoing and confident and brave when really I was pretty introverted and socially awkward. So I leaned into that and I went right into the college binge drinking scene. And then from there, I slipped right into mommy wine culture, right? It was like the same people who were binge drinking at fraternity parties were now, sipping fancy wine in our cul-de-sac while we had the baby monitors listening for, if one of the kids was going to wake up. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a rock bottom drinker. I mean, we know there's no real definition of that, right? I wasn't drinking every day. I wasn't, hiding vodka in my closet. No judgment, because it could have easily gotten there, right? But I was someone who looked like I had it all together on the outside, right? That's the point. Struggles with drinking don't have a specific look. No one in my life, including my husband, had any idea that I was struggling with this. And it was that cycle that so many of us are familiar with, right? I was a blackout drinker. That was, from that first time at 14, it became clear that I was a blackout drinker. And I hated who I was after those blackouts. I would wake up the next morning, I would be full of shame and regret and self-loathing. And I would just beat myself up and I would swear I was never drinking again. And then I would, make all these rules for myself. I'm only going to have one drink. I'm only going to have 2 drinks. I'll only drink on the weekend. I'll only do this. And we know how that ends, right? It would last for a week or so, and then it would happen again. And I would repeat the whole cycle. And I felt all of this kind of coming to a head in 2021. And like so many people, my drinking did escalate some during the pandemic. We had a lot going on. My husband was diagnosed with cancer. He was laid off. We had a death in the family. It was one thing right after the other. So it was like, clearly wine is what you do, right? In this situation. And so I leaned into it. And it had such a huge impact on my mental health. I could feel my depression and anxiety sort of spiraling. And eventually one morning, August 6th, 2021, I woke up with what would ultimately be my last hangover. And I said, this is it. I don't think it's supposed to feel like this. Life is not supposed to feel this bad. I'm done sabotaging myself. And this is the end. I stepped off the hamster wheel and I haven't looked back. And it has been the most incredible decision that I ever made for myself.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I really appreciate your honest and vulnerable storytelling. It's not easy to open up like this in a public forum. No matter how many times we do it, it's still a thing, right? But once we start to really own that story and own that version of ourselves as who we were and that's what we did, it becomes a lot easier to be much more, public with this story. So I appreciate that. And I know my audience does too. So thank you so much for sharing all that.
Of course.
I love everything you said, and it makes me thankful. My kids are a little bit ahead of yours. I have 3 kids as well. I have 2 daughters and a son, but they're about to be 20, 18, and about to be 16. So we're a little ahead of you.
Yeah.
So, and I got sober a little while ago. So I missed the mommy wine time culture. And although I was definitely would have been participating in that. Unfortunately for me, I feel like being a sober woman, a woman in long-term sobriety, when all of that started to hit, I really, it hurt my heart in a different kind of way. I feel like watching that unfold right before my eyes on social media, because I could just feel what it was. I just knew what these moms, I had kids too. Like I was going through it. I raised 3 teenagers, and it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Especially through the pandemic and just all of the challenges of older children in general. And I could just feel their pain, you know, from these women, because I had that pain too. I wasn't a mom yet, but I had that pain. And alcohol, I thought, was the glue that was keeping me together. I thought that was, my solution. Um,
Right.
and then back then, for me, I don't know about you, it did feel like that was true. Of course, I know for sure that was not true, and I have way too many stories to share about why that's the case. So, thanks for sharing about that part, because I do think that the glitter cups and the driveway fire time with the alcohol and getting your spot at the pool and all that is such a disservice to families and especially to women.
It is. It's hurting women. It's hurting children. I mean, kids notice everything,
Yes.
right? Kids notice everything. And I feel like my sobriety came at a perfect time for my family. My kids never really saw me drunk. I managed to keep that sort of in check. But they knew I drank, and they knew, I had the coffee mug that said, "This might be wine," and I'm so glad that they'll never know that version of me, right? They were just young enough that they'll barely remember that.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And so now you're shifting into this new phase of your life, which is a phenomenal place to be, because sobriety, life in recovery to me is just it's many things, right? Magical was the word that came to my mind, but it's only that because there are so many parts to it.
Yeah.
There are the big gratitudes, the big excitements, the big presence that we get to feel because we are sober women. And then there's also, the pain of the feelings, the uncomfortableness, the challenge that it becomes to say words out of our mouth to other people, especially people we're close to stand up for ourselves, things like this. These are the challenges that perhaps when we were active, they were probably there, but we either didn't notice it or it didn't feel as uncomfortable because we had this thing that was kind of helping us out a little bit, or we thought so.
Right. Exactly.
So I love the space that you're in, because you're sort of newly sober, right? It's only been a couple of years or so. And so this is the best place. I love it, because this is the time for, in my experience and in my work with women, when women begin to like wake up.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
once you've been sober for, what do we say, like 2 weeks or definitely 30 days, you're as clean and sober as you're going to get. That's all physically as clean and sober as you're ever going to
Right.
be. But then that work that happens in that initial year, that first 6 to 9 months, and then a year, to me, it's kind of like having an infant. There's so much happening. There's so much change. And, I don't know about you, but I had to relearn. I was a blackout drinker as well, falling down blackout drinker. I was also really depressed and anxious. And so I had to relearn how to live life, or actually learn how to. And so even silly things like, learning to brush my teeth twice a day, or feed myself appropriately, or not run for 2 hours a day, things like this. Like, I had a lot of dysfunctional actions in my life that might have even appeared healthy, that I had to really kind of learn how to manage appropriately.
Right.
Sober. But this waking up that happens, can you relate to that?
Oh, I so relate to that. I feel like the first year for me, it's kind of it's sort of magical, but it's sort of tumultuous. Everything you're doing sober, you're doing it for the first time. You're like checking off all these milestones. Everything feels so big and meaningful.
Yes.
And then into the second year, there's this sort of like calm and peace. Like, I've got this. I'm not, everything isn't a first. I know what I'm doing. I'm sort of figuring out who I am without alcohol. And it just felt so much more, I don't know, relaxed. And I even just said, now going into this fall, I feel like something about this fall being sober is just magical. That's the word I keep using. And it sounds so cheesy. But I'm just so comfortable with who I am and where I am and the decisions that I've made. It feels like there's so much hope and opportunity. It's just a really lovely feeling.
I love that. Oh, I love that. And I do think that's the experience for most people. I mean, even though there might still be problems like a lingering or things you're
Right.
working on, of course, but there is this sort of renewed spirit, like you're kind of coming into life, not for the first time, but as new, and fresh. And that's the kind of question that I feel like I love to pose to you, even like, what is it like after the first year? What is life like beyond that initial phase of recovery?
Beyond year one, I feel like the biggest change that I noticed was in my confidence,
Yes.
right? You feel like you're kind of like that baby giraffe in the first year, figuring out how to do it all, kind of wobbling around. But when I got past that point, I just felt so much more confident because there was no more wobbling. There was no, oh, but if only I could just have a glass of wine, or I miss this, or there's some of that natural kind of like grieving the old us, or the ability to drink, right? Early on. But it was like I moved past all of that, and I just felt so confident knowing that there was only one version of me. There was only one version of me that my kids were going to see and experience. I think confidence was the biggest change, and peace, just feeling so at peace with it all. I still wake up every day, on a Monday after the weekend thinking, thank goodness, right? Mondays didn't used to feel like this. Um, so I think that's the biggest change. The first year still felt kind of hard in lots of ways, or there were hard moments and you felt wobbly. But after that, I definitely, noticed a shift in confidence levels, and just it does all get a little bit easier.
It does get easier. You're right. And there is, like you said, a kind of a peace and a calm that starts to come upon us, which is wonderful. And at the same time, and maybe you can share your experience with this, there's also a little bit of I feel like in the awakening, there's almost a little bit of unrest, but not in a negative necessarily way, but more of a questioning of ourselves, like, who am I now? That I'm this kind of emerging sober woman. Like, what is my life? What do I want my life to be in the future? What do I want to do? What are the desires of my heart that are now kind of bubbling up at the surface? They may have always been there, but we tamp them down when we're in active addiction. There's no space for a lot of dreaming or pursuing things. So I'm curious what that's been like for you as you start to come out of that first phase.
Yeah, there's definitely been a little bit of unrest for me, similar to what you described. And I never want to, when we talk about it being, it's magical and everything, I never want to, you know, portray the image that life is perfect once you give up alcohol. You still have issues, you still have problems. You're just learning how to deal with them in a more productive manner and face them head on, right? And even knowing that you're doing that feels good. But for me, the unrest that you mentioned, yes, I feel like I'm almost, and maybe some of it is a coincidence, coinciding with my sobriety, but some of it's definitely related, almost like I'm going through some kind of midlife crisis where I'm trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, right? Because my identity has definitely shifted. My work has shifted. I wrote a book about my journey through the first year that I'm working to publish. So everything has shifted, and I'm trying to figure out what that's going to look like going forward. And there's also this whole idea that, well, my identity now is kind of focused on my sobriety and my choice to live alcohol free. So what do I want that to look like down the road? So yeah, I mean, I've definitely been wrestling with all of those things, but wrestling with anything feels better when you're not also wrestling with alcohol, right?
Well, and even when it doesn't, even in the uncomfortable feelings or the feelings of pain and sorrow, which of course we have all the
Yeah.
time, not every moment, but it's always around us. There's
Right.
always pain of some level, whether it's from a child or a friendship or just anything, work stuff. There's always things that are going on, but no matter what, there's clarity because your brain is now functioning at its highest possible
Yes.
way, right? And you're also not distracted by, where am I going to get my next drink? Even if that wasn't really a part of your story, you're not like living on the street trying to get your next drink, but like it's usually very distracting.
Oh, it took up a lot of mental space, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Thinking about it no matter what. And so it's wonderful to be able to take that off the table, and now you're completely kind of focused on yourself and your family and like where you're going. And I love that. Like, what do I want my life to look like? You're kind of like what do I want to do with my life now? And that is that identity shift that takes place as you start to come out of that initial phase of recovery. And it's huge. It's huge. So I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit of that. Like, you did write your book, I know that, but what is kind of coming to the surface for you, as if I were to ask you, like, who are you now? What are the kind of high level themes that are kind of coming up for you, or dig into the details? That's up to you.
Well, one big part of my sort of identity shift, I will say, is I've had to learn to navigate life and accept who I am as a major introvert, right? And that's even an issue or a thing for me because I used alcohol for so long to try to make myself something that I wasn't, right? I was the party girl. I was, social and outgoing and all of those things just by drinking. I mean, I hated it. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to, remove that layer of social awkwardness that I always sort of dealt with. And it was exhausting. And so when I quit drinking, it was such a relief to kind of be able to put that behind me. But it was like I had to learn how to navigate life as an introvert without using booze as my like social armor, right? And so that has definitely been a challenge. It's also been very liberating because I've had to, come to terms with the fact that some of the people in my life I was only friends with because we were drinking friends, right? And so friendships become quality over quantity. I have no desire to meet people at a bar or a loud restaurant. I would much rather like pick one friend to go on a walk with. I'm figuring out kind of what feeds my soul and how to be an introvert in an extroverted world without using alcohol to get there. And so that has been a process. And people always don't believe that because I do things like this. I'm on social media. I'm a functioning introvert, but I need lots of time alone. And I didn't give myself what I needed when I was drinking. I would just drink and then I would power through. So that's been a big part of my identity shift. And then the other part, as you said, is just figuring out, who I want to be. I wrote this book. I am working hard to get it published. I'm realizing what a long and painstaking process that can be. And I'm trying to be patient with it. And then I'm trying to figure out, I have ideas for what I want to write next. And I'm stuck in that limbo with, well, do I want to just keep going? Am I a writer now? Or do I want to see if this is successful first? Do I want to become an addiction counselor because, social work and psychology was originally my background? That's something that I'm toying with. I'm all over the place and I think I'm driving my husband nuts. But I just feel like there's so many options right now. And so there's days when I wake up and I'm struggling with the fact that I feel like I just don't have enough to do because I'm in between writing projects and I haven't figured out the next step. And then some days I feel totally overwhelmed and don't understand how. So It's definitely, there's a lot up in the air and I struggle with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you're describing is basically just the process of figuring it out. And
Yeah.
yeah, when we are uninhibited completely and not using anything to, change our mood or alter our feelings, then we're just left with ourselves, and
And you
of
feel
course
it
we can.
all.
Yeah, we can seek good counsel. You have a husband that you can talk to, you have friends, even outside help. We can do all of those things. And oftentimes that is what we need. We need a guide really to help kind of formulate that roadmap, to sort of literally map it out.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's brainstorming, like, oh, okay, yeah, like, what do I want to be a writer? Do I want to be this? And that brainstorming work then kind of evolves into actual action steps and really more energetic work on, like, where is my heart leading me? Like, how does this feel to me? And when I think about being a recovery coach, how does that feel? Like, what would that look like? And when I think about being a writer or pursuing another writing project, does it feel easy and exciting, or does it feel like hard and like blocked? Like, I'm like, oh no. That's the kind of work we can do when we're doing that emotional sobriety work. It's exactly what I do with the women that I work with, right? To help them
Yes.
kind of map that stuff out. And along the way, there are a lot of other things that need to be put into place too, to help us form these new identities. Like, for example, learning to trust ourselves again. I don't know about you, but I had a serious problem with this because I
Oh
really
yeah.
didn't have any real experience in my life where I felt that I trusted myself and my own intuition, let alone really loved or cared for myself. I just never had that. And so building a space and a life that has that in it for most women in sobriety is a challenge. And so taking specific actions based on specific tools and guidance to get to that space where you can make decisions in that way is really key.
Yeah, it is. And self-love is something that, I used to talk a big game about, right? But I felt like a fraud because it's really hard to love yourself when you don't like who you are a lot of the time, right? And I spent a lot of the time that I was drinking not liking myself. And it's hard to wake up hating what you've done, hating who you are, and then figure out this whole concept of self-love that was being shoved down our throats. I was like, I don't get it. And so it takes a little time to come around. And like you said, to really trust yourself again and wake up in the morning knowing that your life is just as you left it last night. You haven't done anything crazy or stupid. But it's really peaceful when you get there.
It is. Honestly, we are kind of frauds. And it's not to be saying that in like a negative way or purposeful. Like, it's not like that we set out like, oh, I'm going to be a
Oh,
fraud
right.
today. But even just your description about your personality, understanding your personality better on a deeper level, like you were being a fraud by trying to be this extrovert or actually being an extrovert who doesn't fit that actual mold. That's not your real personality style, but you were doing that in a way to fit in with your people or to feel socially acceptable or whatever the reasons were.
Right.
And when in real reality, your personality style actually is more introverted. And so, stepping into that space and that identity it creates a lot of freedom. There's a
Oh,
lot of,
yes.
which then brings the peace,
Yeah.
um, which is beautiful. And also I love how you mentioned, and I'm sorry this happened, but the mention about relationships. I think that's another level of the work for us. Relationships beyond the first year and sometimes much sooner do change. Obviously there are people in our life that are only there for reasons of partying or drinking or whatever. But then even in our personal, most intimate relationships, sometimes that can look different, right? There can be challenges there that are many and varied, all the way from, people are very supportive and comforting and like with you on it, to people don't understand it, they're questioning
Yeah.
it, all the way to people where you need to actually, create a boundary that involves no contact. That would be the most extreme end, right? But learning about healthy boundaries is a big part of our new identity too. Like, I'm not a person who lets people treat me this way, or I'm not
Right.
the kind of person that allows people to speak to me that way.
Right.
Those are big differences.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And learning how to advocate for yourself in all of those different situations, especially in the beginning when you're dealing with, people who are asking you questions about why you're not drinking or giving you a hard time. And I feel blessed. I didn't have to deal with a lot of that, but there are certainly relationships that have kind of stepped away from because, I thought if I wouldn't ask you to go for a walk, to chat, sober, to catch up, if you were just a party friend, I, that's not something I'm going to spend my time, trying to nurture anymore. And so I feel like some of that happens naturally. And I know for some people it's a lot more difficult. But yeah, it's a big part of it. And I did have to learn how to set boundaries with my friends so they knew things like still invite me places. I might say no, or I'm not going to split the check when everybody's had 6 bottles of wine at the table or things like that. But those are things that it's hard to kind of speak up for yourself in those situations. You really do have to learn to advocate for yourself.
You do have to, and it's not an innate skill, especially when we've lived a certain kind of way for most of our lives. This is the kind of things that we have to be taught and then kind of guided into, I think, after we get to that initial phase of sobriety, because we don't have the toolbox for that.
No.
We just drank our way through it, or whatever we did. We use people for certain things in certain ways, and so now stepping into an identity as somebody who doesn't allow people to treat you that way, or I'm not the kind of person that stays late when the party gets going. I'm the kind of person that I still come to the thing, but I'm usually gone before 10. Or I don't usually go places or I don't have an exit strategy, things like that, like there's things that we can learn and kind of build that toolbox to keep us safe in our new identity.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, me too. So tell me a little bit about your running career. I know that's been something that you are avidly passionate about. And I feel like for those of us who are have this addiction bent, we have other things in our life that can be sort of seem extreme, right? It can be things like exercise. We can have other issues related to work, or even anything to the extreme, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes we can really use them as one of those tools in a very, very significant way. So I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, running has been one of my biggest tools through sobriety. But I started running when I was in middle school. My dad was a big marathoner and he got me hooked, and I got that running bug. People seem to either love it or hate it. And I ran cross country in high school. I'm nothing to write home about. I'm not competitive anyway. But I did run cross country in high school, and then just continued running for fun throughout my life. And it wasn't until after my boys were born that I really kind of fell more into it for the right reasons in terms of for a lot of my life, I saw running or exercise as a tool to manage my body, right? I always enjoyed running, but at the end of the day, it was a tool to manage my body, to, honestly, to make me take up less space in the world, to make me smaller, right? That was what exercise was for. And after I had my babies, I fell in love with it for a whole different set of reasons, right? I found freedom in running. It was where I cleared my mind and felt at peace. It was how I worked through my issues. It was how I got alone time when I had, young ones at home. And that's when I started running marathons. And it was incredible. It was an incredible mental tool because it helped me learn that I was capable of so much more than I realized, right? I think fitness can teach us so many valuable lessons about life if we're doing it for the right reasons. And I really started to lean into that, and I just fell in love with it. So I ran a lot of races during those years. I also did a lot of runs hungover on Saturday mornings, or missed long runs that I was supposed to do, or went on runs to sweat it out, right? Which, I mean, oh, it's so awful when I think about it. I mean, my poor body, I just abused it, but I was young enough that I could still run 10 miles with a hangover, where now if I tried to do that, I wouldn't get very far. Yeah, so when I quit drinking, I knew that my running was going to be a place that it was going to be something that helped ground me through the process. And it did. And it was also amazing because um, my running performance improved significantly when I quit drinking too, which isn't hard to imagine, right? I was giving my body so much to recover from. It was hard for me to really improve as a runner, like I wanted to do when I was, I mean, abusing myself that way, right? And not getting enough quality sleep, which is huge for recovering, during marathon training and things like that. So many other, physical issues it caused. By the time I quit drinking, I had these massive gut issues that I was trying to deal with. And I think drinking had sort of been masking the symptoms. So my running performance improved, and I just used it as a way to work through all of my frustrations and concerns and fears about a life without alcohol. I ran my highest mileage year ever in my year after I quit, and I loved every minute of it. It was such a valuable tool for me, and it still is.
Yeah. I love that. And that's quite an identity shift too, like as a runner. I mean, even you've been through a couple different iterations of that. And I like that you've been able to kind of see that and identify it, which really helps, because now it's something that you're utilizing probably for a variety of reasons, which is wonderful, right? We get the physical fitness aspect, you get the space and the time to be by yourself and to be clear. And you also get the joy of accomplishment, like
Oh
being
yeah.
able to set a goal and like say and challenge yourself in that way. I'm running like all sports too, I think is incredibly humbling, like there's also times when you just wake
Oh
up
yeah.
and you go out and it doesn't work well. I mean, I've had that many times when you're just
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, I have no reason why I should be feeling this way, but my body is not functioning properly today. And that's very humbling, because then being able to be kind to yourself, being able to sit with that and be gentle. And so I don't know about you, but I used to be horrible to myself. I would be running through my neighborhood and saying the most horrible things, even in sobriety and early sobriety, because I was just so mean and negative to myself before I made a lot of those shifts, that now I can just be like, honor and respect where I am. I can
Yeah.
just say, you know what, I don't feel good today, or I'm going to do what I can, and then I'm going to walk the rest, or whatever it is, because I can do that today. I don't have to beat myself up and treat myself terribly. It's a complete change. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah. And it was really interesting for me too, because the time I quit drinking, I then had to start addressing these massive gut and thyroid and kind of health issues that had been festering. And as a result of all of that, I actually gained a lot of weight, and my running slowed down considerably. Right. So, but it was the most joyful running I've ever done. Right. And I had a little bit of internal struggle with, okay, wait, I quit drinking. Instead of losing weight, I'm gaining weight and I've slowed down. What is this all about? But I found peace with it, and I just leaned in and went with it and decided I wasn't going to let that stop me. And I feel like that was a tool that kind of helped me recover through the health stuff as well as the sobriety stuff. Because I had to learn to love myself through it all and still find joy in the running. And it's paid off. It's been a really slow kind of comeback. But I'm getting there.
Awesome. I love it. So now that you're kind of beyond that first year or so of recovery, you're really stepping into this new space, this new identity. When you kind of think about your life now and kind of everything that's been going on, what do you see as sort of still the biggest challenges for you today in your world?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge for me is probably I still deal with a lot of anxiety. and it feels very different than I did when I was drinking. But I still have that struggle that I, try to manage, and learning how to manage that and to manage stress from, kids going into the teenage years. And that whole big kids, big problems. It's like, I know that alcohol is no longer a tool. It was never really a tool, right? But it's nothing that I'm going to turn to. But I'm still trying to figure out how to manage all of that appropriately. And it's definitely a process, right? Sort of combined with the trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Sometimes it feels like it's just, there's a lot weighing down on me, and I'm trying to manage that. So that's kind of been the biggest challenge, but it doesn't feel unmanageable.
Right. Yeah, no, I think a lot of times it isn't unmanageable for us. It's just more of a kind of a little bit of a signal, like a little like tap on the door, like, hey, there's still like a little more to do. There's always more to do, right?
Right.
We don't ever really arrive in life. But I think those are the types of things that are like kind of running in the background. Like, hey, I'm ready for some more work, right? And that could look like a variety of things, it can look like, really tackling that anxiety, what's causing that, what's creating it, when do you feel it, and like even your own internal thought process. I find that the negative thinking patterns for me personally, and a lot of the women I work with, are truly what create a lot of that anxiety for us. It's when we're kind of stuck in that cognitive distortion of I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure, or I'm not worthy, things like that kind of run in the background. I'm a failure, stuff like that. And then once we start to tackle that and really learn how to inventory those thoughts, really work on whether they're rational or irrational, and then really switch them into much more positive, it can be, kind of life altering on that path. And stress management is key too. A lot of it involves, things like self-care, which for lack of better term, I don't really have anything else to call it, but
Right.
self-care, a lot of times as women, we're kind of taught that's selfish,
Oh,
and
yeah.
also things like, that it has to look like manicures and massages. And although those things are wonderful, I love those things, you probably do too.
Me too.
It's
Yep.
very simple, right? It's like that morning routine that you have that's very specific. You sit in the same spot every day. You enjoy your routine and that time to yourself. It's like a skincare routine where you spend extra minute with yourself, just giving yourself that love, or coffee with a friend,
Yes.
stuff like that. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really is life giving to us, but it doesn't have to cost any money or a lot of money. It can just be, things that we do, taking a nap, even, being, respectful and honoring yourself to say, like, I'm overtired today, so I'm actually not going to be very good to anybody. So I need to lay down for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And I'm a big napper here. But I think it's hard for women sometimes to figure out what meaningful self-care looks like, because we've been taught it's things like a bubble bath or a mani-pedi, which again are great, but alone, they're probably not going to do the trick. So for me, it was figuring out that self-care looked like carving some time out to be alone if I feel like I've been overloaded in the social department, or even just with my family, or getting out for a run because it's a really nice day. I need that to clear my mind. Or, it's finding what meaningful self-care looks like for you is important, because it's going to be different for everyone. And I can always tell when the stress and the anxiety is bubbling up for me, because it starts to manifest in really strange ways. And I just thought of this. I was explaining to my husband a week or so ago, because he doesn't really understand anxiety. He doesn't get it. Right. Sure. And I said, so here's an example. Last night, I lay in bed until 3 a.m. thinking about one of my kids falling off the railing on a cruise ship. Okay. Got myself all worked up and literally couldn't sleep because I was worried about one of my kids falling off the railing on a cruise ship. And he looked at me and he said, "We're not even going on a cruise." And I was like, exactly. It makes no sense. None. I can't explain it. There's no reality behind it, but that's what my anxiety looks like. That's how it manifests, and stupid things like that. But I can tell when things like that happen, that I need to like step back, do some self-care, take some time, and try to reset.
Yeah. And also just like the simple act of reframing. I mean, it's not always as simple as that, but reframing things and being able to look at that and be like, what is going on with me right now?
Yes.
What is going on with me? And like, or like, what am I afraid of? Usually that's my go-to question, because fear is my number one thing typically. And so I'll say, what is going on with me right now? If I'm activated or somebody else is bothering me, I typically ask that, and like, what am I afraid of? And it's typically like losing something we have or not getting something we want, and so maybe the fear underlying is just something happening to your son, like you don't want something to happen to him, and somehow it manifested itself into a cruise ship. But like when we can kind of bring that back into reality, it's really it's a good thing when we get really good at that. But yes, that stress management is what's going to keep us kind of plowing through the day, staying in our own space, staying in the moment and in our own peace. But it does take quite a bit of effort, and some people have the luxury of not having to do that, I guess. Maybe they do, or they just drink their way through it. Today we don't have that choice. So all right, Hadley, it's been phenomenal talking to you. This is a great conversation, and I know my audience is going to love it because it's directly related to a lot of the things that I talk about in my program and in my work with everybody, because finding our own identity, shifting that into what we want, as well as all of these other things like self-care, stress management, even understanding our core values, is such a critical piece to having good emotional sobriety. So I thank you for your time. And if people want to get a hold of you, where do you like to hang out the most?
Instagram is where I'm at. So I'm at Hadley_Sorensen on Instagram.
I'll make sure I link that in the show notes. And do you know when your book is going to be published, or you don't know yet?
I'm hoping that it will be early next year.
Okay, great. Well, we'll make sure we'll be on the lookout.
I will keep you posted.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to doing it again.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.